Welcome everyone to our 4th annual Spark Society affiliate meeting at the annual Psychonomic meeting. For those who don't know me yet, I'm Nicole Castro, and along with Natasha Tokowitz, we are going to be your MCs for our events today. On behalf of the Spark Society Governing Board, welcome everyone. We're so pleased to have you all with us virtually today. The Spark Society was formed in 2017 with the goal of creating networks and promoting the professional development of historically excluded scholars of African American, Black, Latinx American, and Native American heritage in cognitive psychology and cognitive science. Our mission is to create representation by providing a forum for members of underrepresented groups and allies to mentor one another. We achieve this goal by providing a number of mechanisms for historically excluded scholars, including opportunities and information for undergraduate and graduate students, recruitment and retention support, mentorship across all ranks, and education for the broader community about retention and recruitment. As our membership continues to grow, we're expanding our resources, our networking events, and our learning opportunities. If you want to learn more about the Spark Society and become a member, if you're not already, please visit our website at sparksociety.org. You can also keep up with the latest via Twitter and Facebook. Now, there's been a slight change to our panel event today. Unfortunately, Dr. Loretta Neal McGregor is unable to join us, and she sends her regrets. But we still are fortunate to have Dr. Kevin Binning today speak with us about mentoring and instilling belongingness. And we'll have time for Q&A and open discussion about how to enact his ideas into our research labs and workplaces. Our time with Dr. Binning is going to be followed by our speed networking event. And in addition, you may have already seen that the Spark Society is co-sponsoring symposium number 3 in the main conference. This is called Moving Beyond Cognitive Universals. That symposium will take place tomorrow, Friday, from 3:45 to 5:45 p.m. Central Time. So mark your calendars, and I hope to see you there for an awesome lineup of talks. Now, before we begin, I just want to point out a couple of logistical items. First, all attendees will be muted during our session. So if you'd like to ask questions, please type them into the Q&A box. Dr. Binning is going to speak for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have the rest of the time for Q&A and open discussion. Please note that this event is being recorded, and so when I present questions to Dr. Binning, I'll keep the question askers anonymous. And then next, just a quick note about our speed networking event. You may have seen in the conference platform that there's a separate link for that called Spark Speed Networking. So when you click on this link, you're going to be dropped into a remote platform. Already assigned mentoring pairs should plan to click into the event and move themselves to the number table they were assigned. For those who would like to network but were not assigned a mentoring pair, we do have additional tables available that are labeled open. Please use those open tables during the event. Natasha and I will be available in the remote room to help and answer any questions. And finally, the speed networking event will close at 4 p.m. So that way, if you're headed to Wix, we'll see you there. All right, logistics out of the way. I'm going to turn the imaginary microphone over to Natasha, who will introduce Dr. Binning.
Thanks so much, Nicole. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kevin Binning. He is Associate Professor of Psychology and Research Scientist at the Learning, Research, and Development Center at the University of Pittsburgh. He earned his BA at San Diego State University and his master's and PhD in psychology at UCLA. Dr. Binning has also held positions as a senior researcher and statistician at the Center for Research on Evaluation, Standards, and Student Testing at the Graduate School of Education at UCLA, as a postdoc and visiting scholar at the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at UC Santa Barbara, and as a postdoc at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. He recently earned the Provost Award for Diversity in the Curriculum at Pitt, which is awarded annually by the Office of the Provost and the Center for Teaching and Learning to recognize faculty efforts to enhance diversity in the curriculum and inclusion in the classroom. I am so fortunate to have Kevin as a colleague, and I am so glad to have him here today to speak with us about inclusiveness. Kevin, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Let me just get the screen sharing set up. All right, thanks, Natasha, and thanks, Nicole. I'm very happy to be here. Let me just get these things out of the way and we'll get started. Okay, all right, so today, thank you so much for having me. I would love to talk to you about mentoring practices to promote trust, persistence, and belonging in academia. Let's just get started. So what I'm gonna be focusing on are a couple key problems for mentors. One is how can we provide critical feedback to our students that promotes rather than saps our students' motivation. As we know, our students, our mentees, our advisees face a lot of adversity in academia. Things like getting papers rejected, conference presentations rejected, writing papers, and the list goes on, coming up with ideas, coming up and defending those ideas. There's a lot, there's a lot there. So that's one of the key kind of components of today's talk. The second is how can we instill a resilient mindset that keeps students motivated in the face of adversity? So you'll see these two questions are closely related. I'm going to kind of split them up and then I'm going to kind of bring them back together. So here's the goals of today. So what I would love is to give practical, actionable recommendations in two ways. One, I want to demonstrate how to effectively give feedback in ways that build trust and persistence in our advisees and our mentees, even across demographic lines. Okay, so even where questions of trust, where potential stereotypes are in the air, these are the relationships that I'm going to be hoping to speak to today. And second, I'm going to try to demonstrate how specific classroom intervention can promote belonging and persistence. Okay, I'm going to have scripts for that latter one as well for you. Okay, so along these two kind of tracks, there'll be two parts. So in the first part, I'm going to be focusing on when providing critical feedback, building trust is paramount. We're going to want to communicate to our students high expectations, that is high standards, a high bar for performance, and two, that we are going to provide assurances that support that the student can meet those standards. Okay, so this is a little bit of a sneak preview of what's to come. So in part two then, I'll be focusing on instilling a resilient mindset through the intervention. We need to teach students to perceive their academic adversity as both normal, typical, and expected, and surmountable. That is, with time and effort, you can get through this, okay? I'll expand on these as we go through and break these two parts up. Okay, so let's focus on part one. And what I'd like you to first imagine is a scenario. Those of us that have had mentees, well, this may seem familiar, especially with our brand new students. We have a mentee who's a member of a minoritized group and has written a terrible first draft of a paper. Let's say it's their master's proposal, okay? And you know, this is a normal thing to write a terrible first draft. I certainly write them all the time. But as the mentor, we're in a position here to shape the meaning of this terrible draft. How do we give the feedback to our students in a way that will actually make that next draft much better, right? Not make the student feel demoralized, not make the student feel like, what's the point of doing this? I can't succeed here, okay? How do we then provide feedback in a way that builds trust, motivation, and persistence? And I want to just go through a couple of temptations, mistakes that I've made, that I think common kind of misconceptions of how we should be mentoring our students. One is to go easy on them, right? So there's this bad essay. We want to offer praise where appropriate, maybe sugarcoat the areas for improvement, but maybe in the back of my mind, I want to protect my mentee's self-esteem. I just want to not be too rough on them, okay? Kid gloves a little bit, offering praise. Second is the opposite extreme, to perhaps go very hard on them, right? Scare or shame them into working harder. Tell them, you know, you're not going to make it here unless you work harder, and double down and redouble your efforts. You need to go harder, longer, with more intensity. You got to get tough, okay? And what I want to argue is that neither of these are really quite on the mark here, okay? Especially when we're advising across racial and gender divides, okay? Because in these scenarios, stereotypes about intellectual ability can make mentoring relationships especially fraught. That is, when we sugarcoat, the mentee may go through this mental process. You know what, I know that essay wasn't very good. Why are they going so easy on me? They must not think I'm very capable. Okay, this is sort of the betraying low expectations for our mentees by sugarcoating, by going so easy, by offering praise perhaps when it's not even warranted. On the other hand, if you get too tough, these expectations are not realistic for someone with my experience, someone with my background. I didn't go to as strong of an undergrad, perhaps. Who does this advisor think I am? I can't do all this, right? I don't think I can meet this. Okay. These processes, as you'll note, these are common to any students, but I want to argue that they're particularly salient and problematic with when we're advising across racial and gender divides, because questions of trust, because questions of stereotypes are likely to come to the fore. So what should we do? I've hinted at this a little bit with the foreshadowing. What I want to argue is that we should set high expectations. For example, we might say something like, I just want you to know that I have really high standards. I'm not looking for something that is just okay or good enough. And similarly, along with that, as a two-pronged approach, again, to provide assurances that not only do I have these high expectations, these high standards, but I know that you can meet them. Okay? I see a lot of potential in you. I wouldn't be giving you this feedback if I didn't know you could do it, right? This works especially well when you've gotten to know your advisee a little bit, right? If you've just met them the very first time, this might seem not as credible, right? This is a critical piece here. This feedback has to be genuine, it has to be authentic and credible and believed by both of us, right? Both the advisor and the advisee. So high expectations and assurance, this is going to be kind of the theme for part one here. I want to go through a couple empirical examples of how this works in the lab. And just as a side note, this is not work that I even a co-author on. This is work that actually my co-authors on other projects I've worked on have published this work. So praise and assurance without high standards. Okay, what's the problem with this? Why can't we just be nice all the time, right? Well, this can set expectations too low, and overly positive reactions can betray stereotypes and low expectations to the students. Our students are savvy. They pick up on these things, okay? They can tell when we're being overly generous with our feedback, with our praise. On the other hand, high standards without assurance and support, this can make the mountain seem insurmountable. It can make doubts about ability linger in the air, right? You know what? Like I mentioned, that's my background here. I don't think I can make this mountain. My advisor, my mentor is demanding too much of me. Okay, so high standards plus assurance communicates that while the student is not quite there yet, you know that they can do it. Okay, so here's an example. In this setup, student essays were graded. This was actually done in high school led by my colleague David Yeager and my postdoc advisor Jeff Cohen. So student essays were graded and randomly assigned to receive different Post-it notes on their assignments. Okay, so the essays were graded like they normally would be graded. Okay, but unbeknownst to the instructor, researchers then affixed Post-it notes randomly to one stack got one Post-it note and the other stack got the other Post-it note. Okay, so this, you can kind of imagine an essay that's written up, marked up in red ink. And then we've got our Post-it notes. One of them is what I'll call the placebo control. Okay, that half the students get a Post-it note that just says, you know what, I'm giving you these comments so that you'll have feedback on your paper. Okay, pretty benign. It's kind of a nothing burger, right? I'm giving you so you have feedback. Okay, but we, of course, wanted to control for the fact of getting a Post-it note. So the second Post-it note was the experimental condition and conveyed both high expectations and assurance. Okay, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know that you can reach them. Okay, so it's the combination here of both of these statements. And look at these data. So what I want to first show you, this is just lifted right off the publication by Dave Yeager. And what I want to show you is both white bars. Let's start on panel A here. We're looking at white students, okay, on the left here. And the gray bar is just the criticism, right? Just the red ink with the placebo Post-it, okay? And then the white bar is the criticism with the experimental Post-it, the assurances and high expectations, okay? This effect, as you'll notice, is not significant here, just based on looking at these error bars for white students, but it is in the same direction as we see for African-American students. So if you move over to the right here, we're now seeing a substantial effect, where the dependent variable here is the percent of students revising their essay. I apologize, I forgot to mention that. Hopefully you saw that on the y-axis here. So this is the percentage who revised their essay. In the control group, when they just got the red ink with the placebo, 17% of African-American students revised their essay. But when they got the criticism with high standards and assurance, 72% of African-American students revised their essay. And not only that, but they also got higher grades. That's what panel B is showing you here. So of the students who did revise their essay, what I'm showing you here are, this is a mean difference here in their scores on the revised essay. So not only did they persist, they took the feedback, but they turned around and did a better job on it as well. Okay. How else, though, do we communicate our expectations and assurances? What I want to argue is that this is something we do regularly, often probably without realizing it. I know most of, if not all of you, have heard of growth mindsets, right? There's a bunch of great work coming out now on faculty growth mindsets and how the mindsets that faculty hold actually affect their students. This is work by Elizabeth Canning, Mary Murphy, and others. And I want to actually highlight one of their recent papers because it gives more really concrete, actionable things that we can do, and it's actually in our syllabi. So faculty mindsets are hidden in the subtext of our words, and just think about this for a moment. What is a growth mindset, right? Well, it's the expectation that you will grow, right? So it has kind of both of these components in it. The high expectations, I'm expecting you to grow, and I know that you can, right? Both of those are sort of bundled up in a growth mindset. And when you put them in the mind of a faculty member, how do those affect students? Well, very powerfully, as I'm about to show you. Also, what I kind of just will note as on the side here, I think a lot of us are working in environments in universities where high standards are often assumed. So we're at a very selective university where students have worked very hard to get here. The high standards are often assumed, and the faculty growth mindsets can then communicate assurances. Okay. Look at this example though. I loved this. These were just, and I know there's a lot on this slide, so I'll just walk you through it. What this was is they randomly assigned students to read different syllabi. Okay. And one of the syllabi, the one on the left, was a fixed mindset syllabus and contained statements indicative that the faculty member held a fixed mindset about intelligence. Okay. And you can just go down the list here of ways this was communicated. Let's start at the top. If you have not mastered these concepts, you should consider dropping this course. Daily homework's not graded, and it's only encouraged for weaker students. Based on my previous experiences teaching this class, weaker students tend not to perform very well on quizzes, struggle a lot on exams. If you realize you aren't performing well on the first quiz, you should consider dropping the course. How many times in the syllabi are they going to tell me to drop this course? I do not give partial credit on answers. Students either get the questions correct or they don't, right? So these are very kind of high standards, no real assurances here, right? I don't take attendance in class. I believe some students can do well in the course without attending class. I'll not penalize these students with strong math abilities, right? Because this is apparently some inherent trait that some students possess. I recommend that weaker students attend every lecture and discussion section and compare that to the growth syllabus, okay? If you have not mastered these concepts, you should see me or a teaching assistant, and we will provide resources which should prepare you for this course. Notice the high expectations are still there, but there's assurances kind of tacitly, right? Tacit assurances that we can do this and we're here for you. These are graded, the homework is graded and it's encouraged for all of you. Everyone can benefit from this. Quizzes show me how well students are understanding the material, whether there are some students who are not there yet, whether I need to review certain concepts with the class. Define your self-failing quizzes. You should seek additional help to grow your understanding of the material because you can grow, right? Because we are here and that is what we are here to do to help you. Just, a little food for thought. Let me show you how these data played out. This was an experiment, by the way. This wasn't, these weren't actually given in the class. It was in a calculus setting, and the main dependent variables were actually scores on a calculus test. Okay, I'll just show you here. Another dependent variable, though, really important was the perceived gender stereotype endorsement of the instructor. Okay, they left actually the gender of the instructor vague. I don't know if you guys remember that old joke about the doctor and the surgeon who ends up being a mother. I assume most students probably thought this was a man. It'd be interesting. I'd have to ask Elizabeth about that. But they don't explicitly tell them. And what you'll see here, I'm just looking at the left panel, gender stereotype endorsement. Okay, so women endorsing that perceive that the instructor endorsed more stereotypes in the fixed mindset than in the growth mindset. both men and women were lower here. And look what happened with the math performance, okay? With the fixed mindset professor, if you look just at the gray bars, men weren't really affected by the fixed mindset professor. But keep in mind, this is a calculus course. There are stereotypes in the air, likely, about women's math ability. So hearing this instructor being a very fixed growth mindset seemed to sap the motivation and the engagement of women on this math test. Okay? And over here, we see significant improvement for women with the growth mindset syllabus compared to the fixed mindset. Okay, so just a kind of a smaller lab demonstration. There's some other great demonstrations in this paper and in the related work. Catherine Muntz and others have written on this. Great work. Okay, so hopefully you have a few things here. I'd be happy to share these slides with you as well, but definitely check out these papers. So I want to conclude part one there. And as I mentioned, I'm going to kind of leave that hanging and I'll bring it back when I finish talking about part two. They're actually more related than they might appear at first. Okay. Okay. So for part two, we'll be talking. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about instilling a resilient mindset. Okay. And this is work. Parenthetically, this is work that was recently published by my lab and that we're continuing to work on and following up on and replicating. Okay. Here's the message of this intervention. Okay. Whereas the last one was to provide feedback that conveys high expectations and assurances. This one is to teach students a mindset that adversity is normal and surmountable. Okay? Adversity is normal. This is difficult. It's normal to struggle at times. What you're going through is not because of who you are. It's because of the situation that you're in. For example, the transition to graduate school or the transition to undergraduate school, right? We know that this is a difficult thing, and we know students are going to go through things when they make this transition. What I want you to know, student, is that this is not about you or your identity. Okay? This is a feature of the transition, of this experience. Okay? Totally normal. You might think you're the only one that's struggling, but you're not. Okay? Also, at the same time, not only is this normal, but if you stick with it, you will be successful. Students that have walked in your shoes, students that are similar to you, have gotten through this, and I know that you can as well. Okay, keep your antenna out about the similarities between these two as well. So what I want to talk to you about in a little bit of detail here is this classroom-based intervention to teach this mindset, and I'm going to go through kind of the nuts and bolts of the intervention. Partly to show you the different pieces and partly to help perhaps inspire you to run the intervention if you'd like. Intervention is kind of a loaded term. You could just think of this as a classroom activity. I'm going to call it an intervention though for today. It is a 35 minute classroom activity. You can do it once, you can do it more than once. The examples I'm showing you here, we only did this once at the beginning of the term and found some very powerful effects as I'll show you here in a minute. You can run the full intervention, but you could also take pieces of it. And as I mentioned, I'll make scripts available. Don't worry so much about writing this down now. I'll show you this link again at the end, just on the Open Science platform. And if you Google me, you should be able to find this as well. But I'll give you that link one more time at the end. So be ready if you want it at the end. Okay, so this is work, as I mentioned, that's recently published in 2020. And it builds, definitely standing on the shoulders of giants here. It built off work also by my postdoc advisor, Jeff Cohen, his student, now faculty member, Greg Walton, and David Yeager, who was actually Greg Walton and Carol Dweck's student at Stanford, who's now at UT Austin. Okay, and I'm going to be talking about data from two large experiments that we ran here at the University of Pittsburgh, one in physics and one in biology. These are both intro level gateway courses. Okay, the physics course is actually the calculus-based physics course. I don't know, not everyone may be familiar with this, but most universities have a couple of physics courses, one for engineers and physics majors, and one often for life science majors. Here at Pitt, the first year physics course is a required course for first year engineering majors. So this course is predominantly freshmen. We call it calculus-based physics. Similarly, biology is Foundations of Biology, Bio 101, also predominantly first-year students in this course. Okay. I think roughly 80% first-year students in bio and 90% in physics, which, as you may kind of catch on, that means these students are pretty new to the university. These are undergraduate courses, but I'm happy to talk in the Q&A. We've also started adapting these to graduate school here at Pitt. Okay, so these are different social contexts. Keep this in mind. And we knew this going in. We were really targeting race and ethnicity in biology and gender in physics. You'll see more about that as we go through this. So let's look at this physics context and what is the goal of this intervention? Well, we actually call this the ecological belonging intervention because we're not just targeting, for example, women in this intervention. We're more, the way to think about this, I would argue, is that we're more targeting the classroom, okay? Targeting the shared intersubjective space that men and women both kind of work in and understand, right? If you're familiar with work on stereotype threat, I am heavily borrowing from this work. Stereotype threat is the idea, not so much that I endorse stereotypes, but that I know that I might be stereotyped by you, right? Claude Steele talks about stereotypes as existing in the air, okay? Kind of like this cloud bubble is what I'm kind of alluding to here. Stereotypes are in the air, and let's just imagine how this might play out inside the classroom, okay? Let's say we have a woman here working on a very difficult physics problem and struggling with it, right? As anyone would, certainly I would, or anyone might struggle with this. Not because she's a woman, because she's a student, right? But because of the stereotypes that she knows are in the air, that she knows other students might be judging her through, she might interpret her adversity on this problem as a signal of not belonging. Okay? Maybe the reason I'm struggling with this really difficult problem, maybe this is indicative that I don't belong here. Maybe there's something to those stereotypes. And I just, maybe shouldn't be a physics person. Maybe I shouldn't be an engineer. Okay. Similarly, and this is a critical piece here, I think, of this intervention. She's in a work group. She's in an active learning environment, let's say, and is working together, in this case, with another male on this problem. And what's he thinking? Well, he knows the stereotypes too, right? And so literally, he may be thinking the same thing, right? Why is she struggling? Well, she's a woman. I know about the stereotypes. I just met this person. I know nothing else about them, right? This is like week 2 of class, let's say. Maybe she doesn't belong here. Okay? So these stereotypes are in the air. Both parties are susceptible to them and can have detrimental effects on the woman, but I would argue also on the man. I think this is an interesting discussion point, and I have some data to back that up, but I'm going to save that for now. So what we're trying to do then is to clear the air, right? To teach students, no, you don't need to use those stereotypes. Those stereotypes it's not that we want students to think about the stereotypes and then reject them. Instead, we want to replace them and basically close the path off. You don't even need the stereotypes because you've got another explanation, right? Why is she struggling? Well, the adversity is normal. And I think she can get through it, right? You don't even need to go to the stereotype when you've got this mindset in place. Okay, this is what we hope is happening. So instead of the last scenario, the woman says to herself when she's struggling, you know what, it's normal to struggle. I've heard that this is a hard thing. There's a good example. This is hard. I think I can do this if I buckle down. And similarly, her work partner, you know what, it is normal to struggle. I bet she can get it. I bet she'll figure it out. Let's work together. And I think we can both figure it out. Okay, you can kind of hint at how this could be beneficial for men too. Where they don't write off the woman gets it, and it teaches the man as well, right? So we clear the air from that stereotype and move closer, I would argue, to kind of removing the stereotypes that can be barriers for women in this physics classroom. Okay. So let me walk through this intervention here. It looks like I skipped a slide here, but really quickly, we did this to test this intervention. We used classroom level random assignment. Okay? And we did this in recitation sections. So we call them recitations here at Pitt. At UCLA, we call them discussion sections. That you probably have something similar at your university, especially if you have these really large lecture courses like we do here. So bio, for example, is typically 300 students. in the main lecture, meets a couple of times a week. And then once a week, they meet in a recitation section, which is a much more intimate setting of 75 students. There's 4 of them, right? It's four sections of 75. And they work in a kind of an active learning environment in these sections, solving problems, okay? So the control group, in the control classrooms, we just do what you normally do, okay? Do business as usual, and this is the first week of class, okay? So on the first week of class, the business as usual and the control, I do want to put a point on this. It's important to keep this in mind. They did icebreaker activities, similar to what probably you've done in your class, a little bonding exercise, right? Help students get to know each other. That's what was in place in this classroom before we intervened, okay? So the students formed little groups of 4. They then made a team name. They picked a mascot, had to be biology related. So one group was called the heterozygotes. They drew a little picture of their mascot and presented the mascot to the class, okay? And then that group of 4 met every recitation section. We're talking 12 or 13 weeks, you know, with holidays, and sometimes they didn't meet that week if there was an exam, for example. 12 or 13 times meeting with this group, okay? Keep that in mind. The experimental group, by contrast, they formed groups in a similar way, but instead of then doing the presenting and kind of the team building bonding exercise, they did the intervention, okay? And it started off with the instructor just saying, you know what, we're going to do something a little bit different today. I want to talk to you today about the transition to college, okay? That's the context here. We could imagine running this. I've actually run this with the psych grad students in social psych here. These are fairly, I wouldn't say easy to adapt, but definitely adaptable to other contexts, other student populations, okay, other transition points. And here we're focusing on the transition to university, to the 4-year college, large research university, which Pitt is. Okay, so the instructor, put yourself in the shoes of the student. You've just met a new set of group members. You've just made a team name. You've introduced yourself. You're kind of expecting to do biology stuff. Instead, the instructor says, you know what, we're going to do something else today. It can feel easy to feel overwhelmed, or to ask yourself, do I really belong here? Am I smart enough to make it? These kinds of experiences are normal in the transition to college. Everyone goes through them, and they get better with time as you adjust to college. Put yourself in the shoes of the student hearing your instructor say this, right? And contrast that with what we know some instructors do, which is, you know, the old look to your left, look to your right. One of you is not going to make it here. You know, kind of these scare tactics that we see a lot of faculty using. Instead, here the instructor is actually giving the explicit intervention message, right? It's normal, and you can get through it, right? So right off the bat here, we've got an endorsement. Remember what I've said about faculty mindsets. Imagine what this is sort of signaling to students about their faculty and their faculty mindset. But that's not it. That's just the tip of the iceberg, okay? So next, after the instructor has given this little preamble, he or she, in this case in biology, it was a she, said, we're now going to engage in a little reflective writing exercise, okay? I want you to write about concerns you have about college, okay? Pull out a piece of pen and paper. I want you to write about the challenges in the transition to college. I want you to write about your worries, your coursework, thoughts you've had about college, whether physics or biology. How do you think these concerns will change over time? Please don't put your name on it. It will not be graded. Okay, so students then write, and I'll show you a couple examples here in a sec. But what's the subtext? What are we trying to do here? A couple of things. One, the students are going to discuss their transition. They don't know that yet, but we wanted them to have that top of mind, right? To have reflected on and hopefully to have identified some challenges that they've experienced, okay? Two, we wanted them to start to think about those struggles as unfolding on a trajectory over time. Okay? How do you think these concerns will change over time? So you might be having them now, but let's fast forward. Maybe they've already gotten better a little bit. Maybe they will improve with time. Please tell us how. Okay. And then third, don't put your name on it. It will not be graded. And this was a little bit of a double-edged sword because on one hand, we then can't track back and code their writing, which I would love to do. But because they don't put their name on it, we also made them hopefully feel like they weren't being evaluated. Okay, we didn't want them to feel like they were being graded or that it would come back to them or that we would even know who wrote what. Okay, so it's fairly anonymous. Here's I just want to give you a snapshot of how much students wrote first. Of course, it varies. And there are, and those of you who run this, you'll see this, maybe a few students in the classroom who are kind of too cool for school. But by and large, students engage in this wholeheartedly and have no problem filling, a page, half a page with their transitional struggles. Okay, here's one fairly typical, fairly representative. I'll just read it to you. The college overall is a difficult transition in itself. The hardest part, most definitely, is allowing my mind to digest new information from numerous classes all at once. I've never been accustomed to having multiple rigorous courses from period to period in a row. From online to paper assignments to programming, it's all pretty new. Yes, at times I may think to myself, oh, I'm not sure, I'm up to the challenge, I'm not cut out for it. Yet I keep pushing to allow myself to adjust. It's the push that's got me to where I am, that will get me to where I want to go. Moreover, I miss the comfort of my own home. Oh, I almost forgot my mommy. Like I said, fairly typical. We have coded these, content coded. During this semester, the fall term, by far the most common struggle or challenge is homesickness. That is the mode, if you will. Other ones are sort of managing multiple classes. Roommate problems are often top of mind as well. Let me give you one more. This student just used bullet points. Concern about time management won't change. Concern about if engineering is right for me, that's not going to change. Desire to leave and go home won't change. Procrastination, love TV. Being independent, nope. Physics and engineering 0011, kill me now. Getting sick at college, always worried. How to transfer, maybe. How to become a commuter after signing up, any info? Computer troubles, feeling lonely, lack of exercise. Do the hills count? Absolutely. If you've ever been to Pitt's campus, lots of hills. For some of us, that's our only source of exercise. Getting fat, see above. And Andrew, Andrew. A little bit cryptic, but you get the idea there, right? It is a pleasure to read these. I read them every semester that we run them, partly just to remind myself, but also they're so rich. Students, so the instructor has now given the message. The students have kind of reflected on their own struggles, hopefully viewing them on a trajectory. Now, for the third part, we're going to provide them narratives to scaffold their experience with adversity. This is another evidence-based approach here. Basically, we're just modeling the mindset that we want students to adopt by giving them examples of upper class students who have that same mindset, okay? But didn't always have it. They got there through a journey, okay? Let me give you an example. So these are just put up on PowerPoint or they're handed out on paper. We give them 3 to 4 quotes, 3 to 4 stories, and we attribute them to different groups. Let me just read this. I was one of a handful of women in one of my intro physics study groups, and sometimes I felt a little embarrassed to ask questions. However, I quickly learned that other students usually had the same question I did, and we all benefited from working with each other and learning from each other. Sometimes I had difficulty with an idea that my classmates understood. Other times they struggled with concepts that I understood. I remember there wasn't always an aha moment where everything clicked. Notice the growth mindset. It was usually much more gradual, with some concepts only becoming clear after lots of practice and discussion with my study group. I realized that everyone struggles sometimes, and the important thing is to not give up and to help each other out. So that was a quote we attributed to Allison. There were one other quote from a woman and 2 quotes that we attributed to men, partly just to make this universal, right? It wasn't just women who struggled. There's a parallel story of a man who also struggled at first and sort of found their way over time, okay? Where did these stories come from? This one in particular came from a focus group we ran with women graduate students in physics. And part of why I mentioned that is because I learned a lot from running that focus group. For example, this statement here, that there wasn't always an aha moment where everything clicked. I was kind of under the impression that there would be these aha moments and clicks where things would just become clear and moment of clarity, right? But these students were insistent, and it have since been kind of backed up and reinforced by multiple other people, that it's not so much that, it's more of a slog and more of a a persistence and effort, and then eventually things start to become clear, and then they become clear, right? So very kind of strong growth mindset, which we picked up in the focus group and then implemented back, sort of fed back to students through these stories. Okay, growth mindset came up much more so than in biology, but you'll notice a lot of similarities here. The subtext is the same. Here's a quote we used in biology. I didn't go to a very good high school, and I worried that my high school courses had not prepared me well for college. Around my sophomore year, I felt more comfortable. I began to enjoy my classes more, and I found some close friends who I trusted. Notice there's kind of a transition point here, right? I also became more comfortable speaking in class, and sometimes I asked my friends to edit my papers for me. And I saw that even when professors are critical and they're grading harsh, it didn't mean they looked down on me or that I didn't belong. It was just their way of motivating high-achieving students. Notice that and kind of reflect back on part one, remember? Even when professors are critical and they're grading harsh, it didn't mean they looked down on me or that I didn't belong. It was just their way of motivating high-achieving students. So you can sort of see both pieces, right, of the puzzle. I kind of was advocating for you to adopt that language in your conversations when you're giving feedback to your mentees. And here, we're kind of teaching mentees in a way to receive that and to kind of perceive that type of feedback. Okay, cool. So, a couple other details here. Narrative component. This is a story of these narratives, which may not be manifestly clear. These are psychological struggles that students had, right? They're about worries. They're about my anxieties, my insecurities. And then the resolution was also psychological, right? I became more comfortable. I saw new things. My perceptions changed, right? I just want to contrast that with other ways students might resolve their struggles, right? They could withdraw, they could change courses. They could do what that fixed mindset instructor was saying in the syllabus, right? Drop the course, right? That's not what we're arguing here. We're arguing for the psychological struggles to be resolved also psychologically, okay? All right, so now comes the final and most critical piece. And in fact, I should just note, most of what I've just described borrows from prior social belonging interventions by Greg Walton, Jeff Cohen, David Yeager, and others. This last piece, though, is the part that I think makes this intervention a little bit different, okay, and makes it why we call it the ecological belonging intervention. Not only is the instructor delivering it, but this next piece, students are now going to engage in a discussion with their classmates, okay? Keep in mind who these classmates are. These are students they just met, and maybe they realize this, but they will then be working on difficult problems that push them to the frontiers of their ability, right? Over the next 13 weeks with these same students that they're going to be doing the intervention with, okay? So I get questions about this quite a bit. How come this one-off thing seems to be so powerful? I think this is one reason why. We are changing the nature of the context to the nature of the social interactions that will unfold over time right at the beginning of the term, okay? And here's how we did it. So we're borrowing from a great line of work, Tori Higgins and others on Seeing is Believing. But we also do a little bit of what Bob Cialdini might call psychological jujitsu, where we're leveraging kind of communication norms to get students to adopt our intervention message and to share it at the group level, okay? So notice these discussion prompts, okay? There's a little bit of, I don't know, I wouldn't call it trickery, but intentionality here with the way we phrase these, right? Why do you think so many students don't realize other students are struggling? Please discuss this with your group, okay? What are we doing here? You'll notice that the premise of the intervention message, that many students don't realize other students are struggling, is baked into the question, okay? In other words, what we hope, in order to answer this question, students have to adopt the premise, which is many students don't realize other students are struggling. How might you answer this question, right? It's true, apparently, that students don't realize others are struggling, right? We just saw some examples of that. Maybe because they're embarrassed to admit it. maybe because there's norms around not admitting when you're struggling, right? Students are saying this out loud to each other with the peers who they will work with, right? Similarly, how do you think your life will be different when you're a junior or senior? Okay, subtext, hey, your life is going to be different when you're a junior or senior. I want you to tell us how, right? Well, you know, I can imagine by then I'm going to be more established. I won't feel so anxious about being homesick. I think I'm going to adjust by the time I'm a junior or senior, right? So sort of requiring students to see their experience through the intervention lens and to share it at the group level so that they not only say it themselves, but they hear their group members say it, okay? Cool. All right, so the very last piece then is after the students have discussed, the instructor just says, okay, thank you. Well, okay, would any groups like to share what their group discussed? Okay, this is partly to help create this at the classroom level to get the instructor in on it, right? Also, just in case the student was in a group that was kind of didn't engage with the exercise, didn't engage with the exercise very well, that they'll at least hear from other students, okay? And I'll just give you one example of an intervention I observed. A student rose her hand, this was in biology, and she just said, oh yeah, my group, we all realized that it's been, that we're all really worried about how long it's been since we've taken biology. And that was it, right? And so I sat there and I was thinking, oh yeah, I took biology as a sophomore. That's probably pretty common, right? I went to high school in California, so I wasn't sure if, if this is normative everywhere around the country. But in any case, if it was sophomore or junior year, it would be years since these students took biology, okay? So this then gets said out loud in the classroom. The insecurities, the doubt, the anxiety, that's totally normal. The instructor says, oh yes, I remember feeling the same way, and kind of reinforces this at the classroom level. Okay, so that was it. That one day, that one intervention was the only kind of touch point that my lab had with the course. Everything else was kind of business as usual after that first week. Okay, we actually did it in week 2 in physics. So first or second week, you'll see we have some very similar results. I do think it is important that it comes early in the term though, before students have determined whether they belong or not. Right? And this is something students are actively trying to figure out, I would argue, from the moment they step foot on campus, whether they belong or not, and will come to conclusions, research suggests, fairly quickly. I mean, we're talking, if not weeks, potentially days, right, before of interacting in this classroom, in this environment. So early is key. Okay, so there, again, no other differences between conditions. I just want to show you some cool results here. This is just a sampling of results, but the biggest ones I definitely, all analyses are multi-level models. They control for a number of variables such as race, gender, instructor, SAT math, SAT verbal, and high school GPA. There's a little bit more backstory to this intervention. Before we went into these classes, we did some recognizance on historical data and found where which groups tended to underperform in this class. And it just so happened that Asian and Asian American students in bio at Pitt had underperformed in the last 3 years, meaning that they got lower grades than they were expected to get based on their incoming metrics like their high school GPA. Okay, so we ended up treating Asian American students together with Black and Latinx, Native American, and Pacific Islander students in this study. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go through these. So let's start with gender in physics, okay? What I'm showing you here is contrast between men and women. There's gonna be an intervention and control bar. And on the y-axis is their course grade, okay? Just on a 4-point scale, where the GPA scale, right? So 4 is like an A or A plus. We don't go above 4 at Pitt, and 0 is an F, okay? Historical data suggested there was a gender gap in this course, and our control data, our business as usual control, also yielded a pretty clear gender gap where men were performing significantly better in the course than women. However, in courses that received the intervention, that gap was eliminated. And note how the gap was eliminated, right? There's different ways to close gaps, right? One might be to lower men. One might be to just raise women. What we actually see fairly consistently with these studies, everyone seems to benefit a little bit. and the students that are underperforming tend to benefit significantly more. Okay, so this is an interaction here where women, this improvement for women is larger than the improvement for men, but there's also a main effect where everyone on average improved. Okay, let's look at race. Now we're a little underpowered at Pitt. We have significant problems with diversity, particularly in the engineering school. So take this with a small grain of salt. This is not quite significant, this interaction, but you'll see the pattern is very similar to what we saw with gender. What about biology? Same setup here. Again, as I mentioned, historical data had shown a gap, which included Asian American students in the non-white category here. And again, we replicated that gap in the control classrooms. However, we eliminated the gap in the intervention classrooms. Okay, and then this last one is pretty interesting. Okay, there was no gender gap in biology. Now, this is not necessarily true nationally. In fact, I know of biology departments around the country where there are gender gaps. But at Pitt, our historical data had shown that no, there were not gender gaps. Interestingly, these courses are all predominantly taught by women, and the course is 60% women at Pitt. I don't know that, you know, I'm just kind of speculating whether that impacted these data. But what I want to show you here is that there is no gap in the control group, and the intervention didn't, you know, there's no gap to close. The intervention didn't really do much here. There's no real effects involving gender in biology. Okay. All right. So I have a couple more data points to show you from this. What I want to show you here is attendance in discussion or recitation section. Okay. Now, these are the way to kind of view the x-axis here is these are different lectures. Okay, so this class was taught by one instructor. This was taught by another instructor, and so on. And each instructor had intervention and control sections. Okay, so these are, this is the lecture grade, this is the lecture, but I'm breaking down attendance in the discussion sections that were off the lecture. Okay, so these instructors all kept attendance, thankfully. And what we see here is a little bit of variability across courses, right? Across different lecture formats. This one's quite a bit lower than over here. And that's just the control attendance. Attendance overall is pretty high, right? But it's consistently higher when in the sections that received the intervention. Okay, this is true for both men and women, for white and non-white. There's no interactions here by demographic categories that I just mentioned. Okay. Similarly, kind of eerily, in fact, the one-year college persistence looks very similar. The patterns, even across sections here. And again, we see higher one-year college persistence. All we did here, just a little under the hood, we looked after 2 semesters, so they ran the intervention. That was 1 semester. They did another semester. And then after that, so that'd be about a year, we looked at their transcripts. And if they had a GPA, meaning they didn't leave, and they had a GPA larger than 0.00 in that second term, meaning that they didn't withdraw from other classes, we counted them as persisting. If they were absent from the database or had a 0.00, we called them not persisting. Okay, so that's that dependent variable there. And again, these are both significant main effects of the intervention that did not interact with demographic variables. So again, I think this is really more promising data. This intervention does seem to help everyone, at least a little bit. Cool. Okay, so I'm kind of coming near the end here. So what I do want to mention with this intervention, though, and this is a common question, this is not a self-esteem rah boost, blind praise type of argument, right? We're not saying you know, there are no problems out there. There is no racism. There is no no. We're not drawing attention to the racism and stereotypes that do exist in the course and sexism. But we are, when they are brought up, when the students do think about them, right? There are real barriers, right? There are real. You are a minority in this class. That's not going to change, at least not this semester, right? But what we try to communicate is that although there are real barriers and some students do face more barriers than others, what I want to communicate is that these are surmountable and not determinative of your outcomes here, okay? Yeah, now I just want to bring them a little bit together as I promised I would. Maybe some of you have already kind of put these pieces together. I do see a couple of questions here. I'll get to those. I apologize, I haven't read them yet, but part one, we talked about communicating high expectations and providing assurances that students can meet those expectations. Okay. In part two, I talked about communicating the normalcy of adversity. Adversity is expected, right? We expect you to be in a position where you are going to face trouble. I have high expectations of you, right? In fact, if you're not pushing yourself, you're not doing it right, right? So I'm kind of just drawing the connections between the two. And not only do we want to provide, communicate the normalcy of adversity and the expectations of adversity, we also want to provide assurances that students can surmount it, that this is surmountable, this is something you can get through. Students similar to you have gotten through it, and you can too. Okay. So both approaches then kind of have this latent subtext, if you will. The thing you are doing, whether it's going to, in our case, primarily we were focusing on transitioning to undergraduate in an undergraduate institution, but it could be graduate school, right? It could even be a new job. It could even, after graduate school. New faculty members. I think as having been one not too long ago, certainly something I think we could adopt more broadly in other contexts for other populations. So this thing you're doing is difficult. It's supposed to be difficult. And it's not about you if it is. I expect it to be difficult and challenging, but it's also doable. It's also something you can get through. You have what it takes to be successful, even if you don't know it yet. Okay. And so with that, I would just kind of make the claim that we have more power than I think many of us realize to empower students and to shape students' meaning making, the way that they make sense of their experiences, the meaning that I attach to my adversity. It is within our power as mentors to shape that, maybe not completely determine it, but to nudge and to help students kind of see the value in their struggles and to see them as something that we are here to help them with and that we are confident and want them to get through. So it's in how we give feedback. It's also in how our actions tell students what is normative, expected, and doable. And by using our power wisely, I think we can help our students reach their true potential. And so with that, I see there are a couple questions popping up. I'll just thank you. Thank NSF for funding that. The second part two was funded through NSF. As I mentioned, there are scripts available. Also, feel free to write me if you want to discuss, if you were thinking about maybe implementing the intervention or adapting it or taking pieces of it, and you want to consult with me about it, I'd be happy to. I do it all the time. Scripts are available online. And how are we doing on time? Oh, pretty good. Okay, I may be a little long, but I will stop sharing and let's go to Q&A.
Thanks so much, Kevin. A really great talk. I know there's questions coming in, so we'll jump right to them. I'll just go ahead and read the question and then you can answer.
Oh, perfect.
The first one here, the most upvoted, I think is how it's working. Thank you for this presentation and apologies if you addressed this as I stepped away for a moment. Do you think that the positive impact of the interventions might be reduced if the activity is repeated across many different classes for the same students? That is, might students not see it as authentic or not see them as refreshing, eye-opening because of the repetition? Or conversely, might the repetition be more encouraging? And of course, all the above could be modulated by a variety of factors.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what I kind of hear, and I've thought about this too at Pitt, is, what if this gets, so many instructors take this up that it starts to kind of feel a little phony to participants, right? And the kind of in a position to say, I don't know yet, and I would suspect that there is a cap, right? But I also think there is some research coming out, David Yeager's lab in particular, I'm thinking of here, that getting multiple kind of independent verifications of the intervention message is super important for it to take root. What we're doing at Pitt is actually, and I hope to actually study this empirically, we have an online version where we kind of communicate this message before students matriculate. And it's from the College Transition Collaborative. Maybe some of you are familiar with this or maybe are even running it at your institution. Originated out of Stanford. It's a 30-minute online activity that basically conveys the same message. Adversity is normal, adversity is surmountable during the transition. And then we have this in-class one which is actually spreading quite quickly across Pitt. Now, after these studies, all students in intro bio are getting the intervention, and all students in intro physics get the intervention. Right now, fortunately, those are largely independent student populations because the physics students are primarily engineering and the bio students are like science majors. But yeah, I do worry about that. What I kind of think we have going for us, though, is I'm really big on adapting these to particular course contexts, right? In other words, the anxieties that I experience in physics are going to be different than the ones that are attached to the dreaded Orgo course, organic chemistry, right? That's actually one we're focusing on hopefully in the spring. And so the message and the stories that students say, right, and the way that it's delivered might be different enough that it could still be reassuring. But yeah, it's a great question. And it also, I think, speaks to dosage. I'm sorry, well, I'll stop rambling. I tend to do that on Zoom, but yeah, this question of dosage if you do this multiple times, I think it's important, but I do think there's probably limits to it. Okay.
Great. Another question, fascinating talk and data. I communicate my belief in growth mindset to grad students and build my courses around multiple assignments and explain that it's because they give students the opportunity to show growth. However, students often complain that my courses are a lot of work, and I suspect that this is because many grad courses just have one final assignment. Any suggestions for how to better manage expectations for students?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is, I think just give you an example. Like if you ask students how they study, they will often tell you that, I read the book. I read the book multiple times, right? Why do they study that way? Well, it's kind of the easiest, kind of most obvious low-hanging fruit, right? How should they study though, right? You should read the book first, but then you need to do things like, write test questions. You need to go back and reflect and make connections between course concepts and actively engage with the material. But that's hard, right? And students are kind of reluctant to do the hard thing. And so this may be somewhat unsatisfying, I think, but the communicating the value of the struggle and the importance of that for learning, that if it isn't a lot of work, then you're not going to be able to reach your full potential. And that, you as the student might not know what is best for you, right? As this example that I'm describing kind of does, right? If I just leave it up to you, you're going to do what you've always done. Instead, I want you to do something a little different, and just trust me. This is it's the best way to learn. Multiple smaller stakes quizzes as opposed to larger stakes quizzes. Yes, it's going to be more work, but it is a much more effective way. Maybe lean on the literature, right? Mass versus space practicing a little bit. But I think that's the best I would do.
Great. I have a question. I'll just jump in here real quick. So I understand this idea of reinforcing that adversity is real and it's not unusual. Like this is something that you have to face and overcome and develop skills to adapt. I'm curious though, especially I'm thinking about grad students who are in toxic environments where the adversity they're facing is not normal and is not appropriate. How can you help students think about finding what is normal and what's not normal adversity, especially if they don't have mentors to help identify and encourage you can overcome it?
Yeah, I think there is kind of similar to the first question. I think there are limits to the number of ways and sort of the reach of this intervention. We have come across some pretty toxic environments, and these are things I would even argue are borderline like PTSD symptoms that students get from some courses. Courses where the failure rate is 60%, and students are just, I think, legitimately quite terrified of the course. And I don't know that the intervention alone is the right remedy for that, is maybe the right answer here. I would advocate that we might need to create a different kind of ecology for these students, right? So I didn't go into the kind of ecological language quite as much as I normally do in the talk, but we're trying to change the classroom norms and just trying to shift them, right? But if that might not be like realistic here, right? In all cases, But what else we might do, could we create another environment, right? We recruit students from this course and create a new sort of a focus group or a support group. And we've developed some focus group protocols that are designed to be done in small groups kind of like this. I think they're actually much more impactful than the intervention. They're like, they're an hour long. They're dialoguing with the experimenter, with their peers there. So there may be lessons to learn from this that could be applied to those more toxic environments, but I wouldn't, at least right now, I'm not really confident that this intervention would be the only thing that we should do to address those toxic environments. Maybe this in addition to other sort of modes of supporting students.
Yeah, great, thank you. Oh, another question came in. Really wonderful talk, thank you so much. Do you see impacts of these interventions in students' other courses or in following semesters? Would you expect to see similar effects of the intervention in upper level courses, or is it more likely to be most effective in first year courses?
Great question. Yeah, so I held this data back because it's a little bit of it's a little bit hard to get your head around, but I'll do my best. So yes, but it's qualified. Okay, so we have attendance data, right? You could think of attendance in this example, you can think of attendance as almost like a dosage variable. In other words, if I got the intervention, but then I never went to that class, I wouldn't expect you to benefit from it, right? On the other hand, if I got the intervention and showed up to class into this new ecology where I'm working with my peers who've also done the intervention, and I'm there 13 times, in a row and don't miss a class, that's a pretty high dosage, okay? Now, kind of rewind a little bit. Attendance is predictive of grades regardless, okay? We know this is a very strong predictor of college grades down the road even, right? So my attendance in my first year is going to predict my grades, 3 years, 4 years later. We see that, okay, in both the treatment and the control group. But here's where it gets cool. So you control for their course grade, okay? So you control for the fact that the good students went to class, right? When you do that, the attendance variable in the control group no longer predicts their long-term GPA. Okay, that variance got eaten up by their course grade. They went to class, they got a good grade, and now that grade kind of carries the variance, right, on their future GPA. But in the treatment group, you control for their course grade, and attendance still predicts their long-term GPA. Okay, so what I try to argue with this is that the attendance. It's not just attendance, right? It's attendance in the intervention that actually then predicts your long-term GPA. We do see that pattern in biology on course grades. We actually saw that on first year GPA as well. We didn't see that quite as clearly in physics, which is to say that I think it's a little bit complicated, and that's what sort of prompted me to look at attendance. And so it's a moderated effect over time. But we are seeing, with the caveat that you actually went to class, then yes, we do see benefits long-term from this intervention.
Great. And then just the second part of the question, do you think it's more effective in first year classes, upper level classes, or both?
Yeah, we've only done it so far in first year courses. We just got a new grant though, with the explicit intention to go into courses like like organic chemistry, right? And it's an open question, right? But you could think of these. We focus on the first year as the transition, from high school to undergrad, or from undergrad to graduate school. But you can think of other transitions that are within the university experience as well. And I do feel like, at least in my kind of approach, really would want to target those transitional points. So the Orgo course is I don't know if that's quite a transition, but certainly a gateway. Students need that course, and they need to do really well in that course to reach their dreams of medical school. And that course is sort of a unique beast, if you will. And so what we want to do, and what we're proposing to do, so I don't have the data yet, but customizing the intervention for that course. So we're going to be running focus groups in the spring with students who took that course. And we have a protocol designed to kind of develop stories. What's it like to be a student in that course? And what were the sort of sticking points? What were the areas where where students really ran into trouble there? And then incorporating that as the story portion of the intervention, right? Maybe changing up what the instructor talks about at the beginning. Now they're not talking about, oh, worried about the transition to college, but worried about this course, right? I know a lot of you are really concerned about this course. I can tell you that that's very normal, right? And if you do the steps that I take, your chances of doing well in this course will improve, that sort of thing. So yeah, the transitions within the major, even we did sorry, I'm just sort of remembering the different examples. We did another one where they actually select their major as juniors in health and rehab sciences here at Pitt. And we did the intervention. We didn't collect data on it. It was just we kind of just developed it and ran it right at that transition point between from sophomore to junior when they're just declaring that major. So quick answer, yes, but with adaptations.
Great. Another quick question. I'm curious if you have tried this intervention with online classes where students may watch the class synchronously, asynchronously, and if this intervention is still helpful with the different teaching modalities.
Yes, we ran it during the pandemic using breakout rooms. I don't have data on that yet, though, and just because it's somewhat recent, and I'm still trying to analyze data from before the pandemic. But we did run this with breakout rooms, and the instructors who led it said it was fine. I think we would probably all prefer to be in person, and I would too for this intervention. But the breakout room seemed to be a pretty viable strategy, and kind of took it online. Now, could this work for online only courses? I think it could, especially if there's a lot of kind of social interaction that goes on in that course. This is where I think that this particular intervention really has its most sort of bang for the buck, is in shaping the way that we interact with each other, and shaping the stereotypes or lack of that we attribute to other people, especially when we first get to know them. These stereotypes are in the air and they're useful because we know that they're shared, right? But they're also really detrimental to students in the classroom. And so that's part of what we think where the action is here. And to the extent that that gets diminished in online settings, I think the effectiveness of the intervention might also be diminished, but those are empirical questions.
Great. Last question, and hopefully we can make it quick just so people can get to the networking event. So great talk. You speculated that the intervention may have affected social interactions within the groups throughout the semester. Any plans or ideas about how you can tease this apart from the effects on individuals' mindset?
Yeah, so there are, actually Greg Walton ran an intervention in 2015 in engineering, social belonging intervention. It didn't have the ecological component, but they found effects on intergender friendships. So there were more women that have men as friends in the intervention condition relative to the control. So it's suggestive, right? It's not quite on the money, but we're also doing some things with interviews. We are doing some really in-depth interviews with about 30 women who received the intervention, and I've coded them. One little tidbit of data I can share, the women who received the intervention seem to be less likely to mention gender in a question where we ask them about their identity in the class. Again, it's somewhat tentative and speculative, but perhaps the salience of gender was diminished in the intervention condition, and I would like that to be true, and it would speak to the mechanism that we think is operative here. Yeah, still more work to be done on that for sure.
Thank you so much, Kevin. There's lots of praise and lots of thanks in the chat about your talk, and I know people are very interested. You mentioned that the slides might be available. Do you have a way of sharing that, or maybe we could share it through the Spark Society? I'd
be happy to. Yeah, I can send it into you, or people email, whatever you recommend.
Okay, we can continue to chat about that, and we'll send out a blast to everyone that registered for the Spark event and let you know how we'll share those slides.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. And if you are on your way to the networking event, you'll just close out of this and click into the next link. Thank you again, Kevin. It was so great.
All right. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.